How's it going, everybody? I'm Carter Hammond, and today my guest is Brandon Lemay. He is an activist and organizer in the state of New Hampshire, and we're going to be talking about just some of the nuances of organizing. So, yeah, Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, I guess let's probably start out with what does it take to be an organizer, right? Like, I think that's a term that everybody hears and they're like, yeah, it's important, right? We gotta organize. But I don't think a lot of people actually understand what an organizer is doing on a daily basis. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, hey, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and even I still ask my question, or I ask that question to myself every single day here. But I would say fundamentally, an organizer is somebody that builds relationships with myself and with others. I am connecting people with each other. One of my favorite things as an organizer is when I introduce two people that didn't know each other and they become like best friends. So I would say organizing is really about building relationships and building community, but also having a sense of purpose, a sense of, at least in my case, justice, and really strong moral convictions. I would say also, like, what's really, really essential is a desire and a love of your fellow human beings. I do these things because I want to improve the lives of myself, my community, the people that I love. And also, I think what's most important is a sense of a revolutionary optimism, which is the belief that you will win. Or if you are not going to win, you are going to set somebody else up with that win from the work that you've done.
Yeah, so it's really the job of an optimist, right? Like there's just so much hope that you got to lean on to do it.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, if the idea is connecting people, right? I think like just about everybody has encountered this thing where, like, you never agree with anybody 100%. And never. And so, especially in a state like New Hampshire where people have some pretty weird takes from time to time, I'm curious, like, how, like, I would imagine that a big part of your job is sort of reaching a more disconnected voter, or somebody who may not even vote at all, right? And so the question I would sort of have there is, like, how do you personally approach trying to get somebody who's just completely disengaged from any kind of, like, systemic operations that happen on a governmental level to actually pay attention and identify the way in which their individual life is impacted by legislation and contracts and things of that nature?
Yeah. So actually, I want to clarify a little bit too. So not only my role as an organizer, have I been reaching out to voters, but also I work for a membership organization called Rights and Democracy. And a lot of what I do is I help to train people to be able to have those conversations. Because the organizer is only as effective as many people in your network here. I could maybe on a good day, I could knock 200 doors and maybe talk to, like 30% of those people right there. So I really think that, like, what's really important for an organizer is also that you're multiplying the efforts that you have, that you're, getting other people to also go and do that stuff. So there's an extra layer of complication to that, though, because now you're adding more people into the mix, people who are usually aligned, but maybe have, disagreements here and there. And maybe you'll have to ask the question to me again because I've gone down this little side route here. But when I think of organizing, I really think about organizing power. And to organize power, you have to organize people. And people are really messy. They believe, people believe contradicting things within themselves. They'll believe things that will contradict the other people around them. But I say that like my role as an organizer is to outline self-interest in all of those individuals here. And what I mean by self-interest is, people can be selfish, people can be selfless, right? Everybody is self-interested. So, to kind of go into this, example a little bit more, being really selfish, like that's maybe what you can cynically think of a politician, right? Like they are just trying to build their own power, their own prominence, their own wealth to benefit, their own families and friends. And then the other end is being selfless. Like, you're giving the clothes off of your back here to help somebody else when you're cold yourself. You're giving away so much of yourself that you're burning yourself out, or that you have just nothing left to give for you and the people, most immediately around you. But where everybody can be self-interested is, for example, is like, I want to make sure that my kids have a good public school system, and I want to make sure that my neighbors do too as well. Like that's not selfless, that's not selfish, that is self-interest right there. And I think what's really important is hyper-focusing where that self-interest lines up. So, for instance, I've done a lot of housing organizing in my time with Rights and Democracy. And we tend to have people who are, and again, I'm talking about more of like, like the activists, the people that are like really, really, really enthusiastic about, finding solutions and, building a better community for everybody. There was a weird coalition, and by the way, I love weird, of like, I would say liberty focused people who saw that like, our zoning codes are just way too overregulated. And then you could have somebody like me, a far left socialist who views, the way that we interact with housing as, prioritizing profit over basic human dignity. Now, those are two completely different reasons for getting into this. But we could argue all day about where we differ. How do we feel about housing vouchers? How do we feel about public housing? Okay, but the most immediate thing that we could do right now in the city of Manchester is to lax some of our zoning codes that only allow us to build single family homes. And we just want to make a city where you could have more ADUs, often called in-law apartments, where we could have more multifamily homes like duplexes, townhouses, and stuff like that. Because we could spend all day talking about our disagreements, but if we just want to focus in on our mutual self-interest, you can actually plan and you can do stuff together. And yeah, maybe we're going to argue over school vouchers. Maybe we're going to argue over abortion. But we are here to talk about this immediate next step because it's both in our best interest to be doing this.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, in a sense, you're kind of trying to identify the lowest hanging fruit and then like hone in on that specific issue so that you can actually make some real gains there, right? I mean, if I'm understanding correctly.
Exactly. And what's also really important to acknowledge too is that like I have like a North Star. I want a society that has significantly fewer landlords. I want a society with way more cooperative housing in it, where people are low-income people, especially, are able to actually become owners, at least in part, of the properties that they live on. And it's not compromising your values if you are starting small. As long as the next thing that you're fighting for doesn't harm your North Star, you should be doing it. And if you have a better idea of what to be doing next, then you should be doing that instead. I hope that kind of made sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely does. I mean, I think this is super interesting because if you look at a vast majority of sort of online leftist political discourse, and I think like this channel tends to lean itself more towards making its way into those kinds of spaces. So in a sense, we're probably more so talking to people who have that like, socialist North Star right now. So I think it's really important to sort of talk about having to reckon with the impulse of essentially purity testing people when it comes to dealing with what organizing actually means. Like if you want to genuinely gain power through people, there's a lot of sort of holding to conflicting truths in your head that you need to engage in. And you can't just simply say, well, if you don't sign on to every single checkpoint that I have on my list, then we're opposition. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is it. I find that intellectually lazy in a way. And yeah. I want to say here that like I am chronically online. I really like to balance out the fact that I touch grass, but I'm also online a lot. As a matter of fact, like I like to browse Reddit, TikTok. Well, I used to love Twitter. Like I would go out, knock doors, talk to voters, talk to tenants, talk to whoever. And, so like, I feel like I have a really good balance of like, I understand where the online leftist is coming from. But also I understand how you kind of have to temper some of those desires that you have to call out, to purity test, and all that stuff, because real life requires compromise. And I'm going to say this right now. We could have a revolutionary vanguard. We could have a socialist revolution tomorrow. There's still going to be compromises that you as a leftist are going to have to make with other leftists. There are so many niche leftist ideologies out there. We might have a different view on like housing is administered through this, new revolutionary government, right? Like there are always going to be disagreements. But really, I think politics is really the art of the possible. And you're not going to be able to get everything that you want. And I know maybe I sound a little bit too much like an establishment liberal right now, but there is a little bit of truth to that. Like there are compromises that even my revolutionary heroes had to make. Even in particularly, I think of like the civil rights movement as well. There were compromises that Martin Luther King had to make. He had to use the democratic establishment, who wasn't really that interested in passing the Civil Rights Act. And he had to wheel and deal. He had to make compromises because he had this, again, North Star of a society completely free of racism, bigotry, and also dignity for all workers as well. And I think that he's a great example of somebody that, like, again, he had his eye on the main prize, but he would think of, all right, but how do we get the Civil Rights Act passed right now? What kind of compromises have to be made that maybe don't sit right with me in this moment?
Well, and I think MLK is a really interesting example too, because what's so funny about MLK is the moment he started sort of changing the target of his ire to servicing like, hey, we need to take care of poor white people too. Yeah. All of a sudden, the establishment really turned on him. And that was when he, it's like people forget that when he died, was assassinated, he was really falling out of favor in terms of the public eye and he because he was being very openly socialist, and I mean in like a very Christian way. Like.
Well, early. So I don't mean to cut you off. This is like a chronic thing.
No, please.
Here. So it has been stated before that like they've been labeled as proto-communists. It's the Levelers movement in England. This was around the time of the English Civil War, the English Revolution. I always get it mixed up because the English Civil War was more of a revolution and the English Revolution was more of a civil war. But anyway, but it was this idea of like these radical, anti-Catholic Christians here. Who believe that we should all be equal here. Like that was a value deeply rooted in Christianity. And, like the fairness that, they interpreted as Jesus Christ, promoting in his life. Sorry,
you're good. It's just, no, it's okay. But I mean, like, this is how it's going to be. We're going to get into random niche stuff like this. And that's how it goes. But I try to kind of bring up the Christian angle, like on this channel specifically because it's New Hampshire oriented and we have a pretty significant population of people that are Christian. That really kind of bears out in the fact that if you look at like the top schools that are receiving vouchers right now that are not public schools, they're mostly private Christian academies. So there's data to back that up. But I just, I always think this is a really interesting dynamic where, I mean, you made an interesting point here where you're like, oh, I kind of sound like a liberal a little bit when I say this, but that always highlights to me the reality that leftists need to get very, very real about where the line is in terms of what makes what at what point do you become a liberal? And a lot of times for me, right? And I think for me personally, that line a lot of times has to do with putting more eggs in the individualist basket than the collective basket in service of capitalism, right? Where it's really about the Benjamins, you know what I mean? It's really about getting the bag and being willing to sort of stop paying attention to the people that gave you the power that you have, right? I like to point out that before social media, the best way to become an influencer was to run for office. You know, it's like because it's purely just trying to, in a sense, monetize social capital, even more so than doing something like becoming an actor, where you literally have to go to work. You know what I mean? You have to do something as opposed to just walking out in front of a microphone and spouting platitudes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you kind of said something interesting here. So I really think that if someone's watching this and, you know, you identify as, you know, a cynical online leftist, or maybe get called one here, I think in general, leftists need to get really serious about power. Because, you know, I think it's great to espouse values. I think it's great, you know, if you can amass an online following, you know, espousing the values that you have. But if you're not converting that into actual political and social power, you're not doing enough as a leftist. Really, it's all about, I mean, I have these values here because I want to build power to build a society that's more fair, a society that, you know, losing your job doesn't throw you out on the streets. And, you know, I could espouse those values all day, but what am I actually doing to get us closer to that society other than, you know, like shit posting on Twitter?
Right. And I mean, to me, I always think about it a lot of times in terms of like, I really appreciated how Michael J. Brooks used to talk about the left needs to use Machiavelli a lot more. And again, like I always try to caveat that with like, look, like the guy was fucking evil. Like in a very textbook sense. And there's a lot of stuff that he writes. I mean, The Prince is almost immediately contradictory to itself, where he's like greasing up the subject of the book and then immediately turns around and is like, don't listen to people that give you platitudes. So he's already kind of showing all the cards there. And there's the question of like, well, I don't want to work for Machiavelli, but I also don't want him to work for me. And it's and it's like really important to be able to like understand that like despite all of those things, he's describing a very, very innate condition of sort of like the lizard brain in people to act in self-serving ways and to try and just game the system to get what you want. And it's about being able to sort of slowly and methodically understand exactly how to pull on those levers of power in order to get what you want, and then knowing exactly the right timing to abandon it and let it go and say, yeah, this isn't when we touch this anymore, because, you know, like you can't play with fire too much or you will get burned.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I think I just say there are lessons I think that you can get from many different writers. And definitely, Machiavelli is an example. I think you point this out pretty well. Like there are great lessons to learn in there. And I really think like when I bring this back to political organizing, you know, the first step is getting people, building relationships, you know, getting some sort of semblance of like a shared goal, or at least like a shared like next step right there. And then with those people thinking, where are the levers of power? I mentioned self-interest, right, before. Well, people that hold power have self-interest. Everybody wants something. Everybody fears something. And whether this is as simple as changing the zoning codes in your town to whatever, you have to think about, you know, what does this particular person with power want? And sometimes they want positive attention. Sometimes they're looking at a higher office and they're looking to build a resume of things that they've accomplished. And then you kind of go to like the fear. What does a person in power fear? A lot of times in local government, people just fear attention because they kind of just signed up for their city council or their town council or whatever. Just because it's kind of more of like a social thing for them, really. And they just want to go to these meetings, be a prominent person in their community, and not really be bothered by anything much else. So it's really important for you and your comrades or your colleagues or your friends or whoever to really consider, like, what are the levers of power? Where can we put pressure on those levers? Who should we be putting those pressures onto? Is a really important part of the process.
Yeah, I agree. So something I'm sort of like interested in talking with you a little bit about is like you're an independent, and so I think people get all twisted up about this, right? And I think the reality is, like, a lot of times, like, I would probably define myself in a similar manner. I would have to go down to the town and double check my registration, but I'm fairly certain that I'm registered as an independent. I have not ever voted for a Republican. And the reason for that is because literally everything they do is antithetical to what I think we should be doing. So I will pretty much always support Democrats because they are the closest to what I believe ideologically. But at the same time, there's an insane amount of sort of unipartyist, implementations that happen, and I mean, I think, like, if you like, I have continuously referred to polling that was done that basically shows that Senators Shaheen and Hassan are the number 2 and number 3 senators that vote for Trump policy underneath John fucking Fetterman. And it's like, so at that point, it's kind of like, well, like, I really am biting my tongue till it bleeds every single time I go into the voting booth, because I know that I'm not, like, I'm either voting for somebody who will make things worse or somebody who will keep things garbage. And so I'm always curious as to, like, I feel like one of the main goals for a lot of organizers right now is to actually try and shift the Overton window on the Democratic Party specifically back to a more leftist position. And we face a lot of challenge with that. And I mean, like, I think, my guest from last time, John Kuiper, is, did the whole I'm going to be independent, and now he's out saying that he's going to run as Democrat again. And so I know that he's really struggled a lot with dealing with Ray Buckley, who has just been in power for the state party for a really long time and controls a lot of the strings. And that's I mean, I think that kind of institutional power is a huge problem. I think the fact that we engage in dynastic politics so much in the state is a huge problem, whether you're talking about conservatives or Democrats, so I guess from the perspective of a organizer and activist on the left, what are some of the best ways that you've identified to sort of try and put a chink in that armor and do a little bit of, like, leftward dragging for the Democratic Party?
Yeah. So also for a little bit of context too, I was a lifelong Democrat up until like my late 20s. And I'm going to give you a very, very long-winded answer here. So I grew up in a union household. I'm actually 4th generation union now, and I'm very proud of that. And I was raised along the values of Democrats are the party of labor, so that's why we back the Democratic Party. And the thing that really soured me on the party was I took a semester off from college. At the time, I was about to become president of the New Hampshire College Democrats. So, like, I was like a very, very big party guy here. Like, I believed in the party fully. But I took a semester off from college to work on the Democratic coordinated campaign in New Hampshire in 2014. And, I went in from this labor perspective. We support unions, we support workers' rights, the dignity of workers, right? And working for the New Hampshire Democrats really soured me on that because, we were working, and I know it's a campaign, but still, we worked 13-hour days, 7 days a week. They would tell me I could get 1 day off a month if I hit my goals, which were mathematically impossible to hit. So that was kind of like the first instance of, what I thought this party stands for doesn't align with how they act. I really don't believe that you can claim to be a pro-working party when you treat your own workers as less than human. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I think I'm still kind of on this journey myself of figuring out where do I fit within the Democratic Party, because, I left the party pretty publicly. And I'm still left with contending with power. There's still a lot of power in this two-party system. There's still a lot of power within the Democratic Party. And as much as I want to distance myself from the Democratic Party, whether I like it or not, we are in a coalition together, at least in some of our immediate policy needs. For instance, protecting good cause eviction here in New Hampshire, which unfortunately just got abolished by Kelly Ayotte. I acknowledge the fact that if there's a Democratic majority in the state house, then that's not a fight that we have to worry about. So I'm really contending with the fact that Democrats are not the most reliable allies if you are a leftist or if you're socialist like I am. But there is some value in them being a viable alternative to Republicans. And I think what I'm kind of observing right now, have you heard of the concept of Entryism in terms of leftist organizing and
100%.
Politics? Yeah, so I think that's kind of where I'm looking back at Mamdani in New York. I'm looking at some great progressives actually running here in New Hampshire right now. Karishma Manzoor gets me really excited for Senate.
Yeah, we've got some good candidates on CD1 too to replace the Papist slot.
Yeah, exactly, them too. And I do believe fundamentally, and I think my fellow socialists will disagree with me. There's nothing socialists do better than disagreeing with other socialists, by the way.
All right.
But kind of my theory here is that, especially in New Hampshire, but I would say in America in general, we have this culture of believing in elections. And kind of like what you said earlier, one of the best ways before the internet to become an influencer was to run for office. And I do think that, even candidates like Bernie Sanders did a lot to open up our imaginations when he ran for president. He was really the only candidate that was talking about wealth inequality in a way that that resonated with a lot of people. I think there's a lot of value in that, to normalize ideas that are just good things to do. And I also kind of think about the immediate harm reduction that can be done when, we're talking about a Democrat's not going to cut Medicaid, or maybe they won't cut Medicaid as much as a Republican is. But then the inner tension in me is that, I don't know if you've heard of when you vote for president, you have to vote for the lesser of two evils. And I think for a while, I was okay with supporting the lesser of two evils right now. Or not now, but over that period of time. And I'm really getting frustrated because I keep voting for the lesser evil, but we still keep getting evil. And the Democrats that we're electing aren't doing enough to stem what Trump is doing. For instance, I'm a really big critic of Biden. I didn't really like Biden that much. But he passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which invested an an unprecedented amount of money into renewable energy that would help fight climate change and reduce, utility bills for people. But what happens? The Democrats completely fumbled the 2024 election. Trump gets in office and is able to undo a lot of that. He's able to undo acts of Congress through his executive overreach. And the common deflection I get from Democrats is, well, we just need to keep on electing Democrats and make sure this never happens. But also, I need the Democrats to be convincing and attractive enough to be able to hold on to power. So that way,
maybe have a backbone to wield it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm at a point now where I don't accept this whole idea of oh, what was Chris Pappas going to do about, Israel, giving aid to Israel, who's committing a genocide right now with U.S. tax dollars? Republicans would have passed it anyway. Well, I mean, honestly, you still voted for it, by the way. Chris Pappas still voted
Right.
for that. But also, like, there's no counter messaging at all from the Democrats at all. Like, there's no like vision of like what they actually stand for. One of my biggest pet peeves actually is like we're in the middle of a housing crisis right now. A lot of my friends have moved away from Manchester because it's so expensive here. And Democrats, when they run for office, they say, yeah, we're going to fight for affordable housing. How? Like, you can't just say, this is what I want. We need a plan of what we're going to do to make it so that somebody working at Market Basket can afford, a modest one bedroom apartment or, and
Right.
maybe I'm a little radical here, maybe even a home. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
like a radical notion right there.
Yeah. Oh
But
my
I feel like I
gosh.
kind of got a little off subject there, and I don't know if I even addressed your original point there, so I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think you kind of handled it a little bit. You touched on enough of it. There was something you brought up Mamdani, and I want to sort of take a second to pivot a little bit here, because you see a lot of and this sort of opens the door to a different topic that we'll get to in a little bit, but you see a lot of online influencers talking about how Mamdani could be the potential sort of like roadmap for entryism, as you pointed out, for the Democratic Party to try and pull it back leftward. But that the thing I try to point out to people is I'm like, look, like the Mamdani strategy does not translate to rural America, which is where the real, like in a lot of ways, the real gains need to be made, right? Like we can pretty much reliably count on places like New York City to vote against Donald Trump, right? They gave us AOC. They, granted, we also have Hakeem Jeffries from there, so there's a little bit of give and take. But the point is that Mamdani's crew can go into an apartment building and they can hit a lot more people all in one whack than we can here in rural New Hampshire. Now, like in Manchester, you've got a bit more play on that because there's just a higher concentration of people in a narrow area, but most of the state is out in the sticks. Like I know in my area, if I were to try and engage in a door knocking campaign, I would be like, and I was a candidate, I would need a small army of staffers, and I would need to have significant monetary backing to be filling their gas tanks so that they can get, and then also just to pay for their time to go around and hit a fraction of those people, right? So the door knocking strategy doesn't exactly work the same way when you get out of those urbanized zones. And so what I'm curious for is like in a more rural space, what's the sort of strategy adaptation that needs to occur there?
Yeah. So what you're referring to, like the jargon that like, organizers would use would be like Mamdani has a really great ground game. And a ground game is easier to accomplish in a city, just because of pure, population density here. And you've kind of touched upon a niche interest I have here, which is I find that, actually, data has shown that ground game like that is really good at moving a close election. And perhaps even a ground game can also keep your supporters really enthusiastic about your candidate. But that doesn't mean anything if the quality of the candidate is poor. If the candidate can't accurately, say what they actually stand for. Because not only did Mamdani have a good ground game, but he also had a really good platform. He was talking to issues that New Yorkers actually really care about. It's it's the most expensive city in the country, actually. And he had policy plans that were addressing those same things. Like, we're going to put city-run grocery stores in areas with not a lot of grocery stores so that working class people have access to fresh food. So I think candidate quality and policy quality matters a lot. And I think Bernie Sanders is a great example of that. You were able to say, like, hey, healthcare in this country really sucks. I'm voting for Bernie Sanders because I want Medicare for all. I want everyone to have healthcare, even if you lose your job, even if you're laid off through no fault of your own. It really matters that you can, that you as a voter can articulate what this candidate actually believes. And kind of going back to like, when a Democrat's running on affordable housing, like think about a conversation that a supporter's having with maybe like a less political neighbor. And this person says, yeah, Chris Pappas is really going to fight for affordable housing. How is he going to do that? And you're just like, he just really cares about it. It's not very convincing. But if you were to say something like, oh, my candidate wants to repeal the Fair Cloth Act, which, prevents the HUD from building new public housing. He's going to invest in, cooperative land trusts. Like when you give people like actual like things that they can vocalize, they become better communicators because they understand what the candidate stands for, and then they can actually articulate that. But also another part of that is I find the way that a lot of Democrat candidates campaign is really uninspired, and it's really informed by how you campaign in urban areas. So a lot of how Democratic candidates campaign now, when we think of like retail politics going door to door, a lot of that was developed through Obama's first campaign in 2008. A lot of like Democratic campaigns run off of this neighborhood team model, where you find someone in a neighborhood that's really influential and you get them really excited about the campaign, and then they get a bunch of people in their neighborhood really, really excited. And it worked really well for Chicago, but, we're in New Hampshire. There are many people that live in Texas and even more rural areas. So I think that part of like the ground game problem is also a lack of creativity. And so like in my work with Rights and Democracy, like we're thinking about how can we actually talk about candidates that we're excited about, but in more creative, we want to experiment a little bit more. So like right now we're moving more towards like a model of like, we find people that are aligned with us and we train them up with, shared language, which sounds kind of BS, but it's really important when you're able to talk about the problem using the same language and talking about the solutions in the same language, naming who is the problem, why is housing so expensive? And it's not just greed, it's not just zoning, it's not just these things, it's a lot of things. And really, kind of like the theory that I'm testing out right now is, can we actually get people to use their own like social networks to be able to communicate these ideas? And by the way, I want to say organizing is not just about getting candidates elected, it's about getting ideas passed, it's about normalizing ideas. And I tend to find the issue side of organizing a lot more fulfilling, because you're not there to support a candidate or a party. You're here to advocate for, again, like a policy, an idea, something that's going to help people. And especially at the local level, you can kind of cross like typical ideological barriers when you're thinking about the issues rather than just like partisanship.
Yeah. So this I just really quick, this brings up a really interesting thing that I sort of encountered. I recently did an interview on the Letter Hack podcast, and he showed me this subway take that was a guy was basically making the argument that like we shouldn't have elections, we should have lotteries, and elected officials should be randomly chosen. And I was looking at it, I was like, I don't agree with the method, but I agree with the idea that informs this, where something that you mentioned that what the Democratic Party will do is they'll go and they'll identify somebody that has sort of like a lot of social capital in their community and then try and lift them up in order to become a candidate and basically inform them of what policy positions they should be espousing, as opposed to identifying somebody who has good policy and then trying to give them the social capital, right? It's like trying to flip that script a little bit. And so I always think that it's like the policy needs to come first. Always. It literally always needs to be the number one thing. And I would imagine that just sort of like by naturally trying to extrapolate outcomes, right? If you are prioritizing somebody's ability to amass a following before you're prioritizing their ability to articulate a policy, that functionally what you're doing is you're playing into like self-serving, even narcissistic tendencies that sort of create the opportunity for a politician to then go on and get, be more susceptible to being bought out by lobbyists, what have you, right? So that, like, to me, I always wonder, like, is that maybe like a huge component of why the Democratic Party has sort of basically become this weird, like, centrist capitalist party and no longer represents the working class, because they're not actually going to union halls or whatever and talking to actual workers and being like, you know what, that guy right there who's basically just like all he's focused on, or all she's focused on, is just getting the hours in at work and then going home and making dinner for their kids and just getting through the day. Like, maybe if we are able to put some real capital, like institutional capital, behind this person, say, you know what, you can take that time off of your job and not worry about feeding your kids and not worry about paying your mortgage or your rent, that you will now be able to go out and have the time to articulate these values, which will then give you the social capital necessary to lift you up. And therefore so you're starting with a correct foundation, right?
Yeah.
What do you think of that sort of framing of it?
No, that actually resonates quite a bit. So through like my paid organizing, my career here, is part of my job is finding people to run for office that are affected by the issues. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest barriers that I have is like, we'll find a great candidate, the working class, maybe they serve like a term in the state house, getting $100 a year, and it's basically a full-time job. So you're basically doing it for free. And they'll say something like, I don't know if I can run for re-election. I'm planning to have a kid. And I'm like, that's somebody that I want participating in my government. Like, somebody that knows what it's like to be raising a kid in this environment right now is going to have, a firsthand experience of what it's like to interact with the public school system, what it's like to have, a kid with an IEP in a school district that's not very responsive to it. Somebody like that is going to pass policies that make, life like a parent like them a lot more bearable. And I really think that we're not a true democracy. Like, we have one person, one vote, but who is actually able to get on the ballot is not a true democratic process here. I would like to joke with a friend. It's like, I think sometimes like the best president, if we just did like a random lottery, it's probably like a single mother that's like managing McDonald's somewhere. She doesn't have the social capital because she's working a full-time job and raising a family. And also to consider this, it takes a lot of money to run for office. People have limited attention spans. So like, you have to buy TV ads, internet ads, and stuff like that. And who's going to be able to raise money but people already with a lot of social and financial capital? So I like to say that the donor class chooses the candidates for us, and then we get to choose whoever remains.
Yeah. So this is, now we're sort of getting into this, maybe gives an interesting segue to the next question, right? So as much as I've been sort of loath to discuss this on my channel, recently there's been a lot of news and hubbub surrounding an article that Taylor Lorenz published in Wired about the 1630 fund, basically, which is dark money that's funding an organization called Chorus, which is basically disseminating money to influencers with the ostensible notion that, like, hey, don't talk about Israel, Palestine. You know what I mean? And so that's like, there's understandably a lot of backlash from a lot of people on the left that are sort of like, hey, dude, what the hell? This is not how you do this. And so again, this comes into the sort of like weird, like utter misunderstanding of how organizing works on the part of Democrats, despite having all that money and all of that ability and like having the access to the donors that could inform this. And so I generally, like, I mean, this is sort of undermining my own agenda here with doing a YouTube channel, right? But the question sort of is like, well, look, like doing this is not real activism, right? This is just a sort of like an information dump for people to sort of maybe like get a little inspired so that they might become an activist, or they might become an organizer, or they might reach out to a local organizer and say, hey, what can I do to do more to contribute, right? That's the main thought process that I have here. But again, like, this is not a channel that produces any kind of big bucks. And I also, because of the degree to which I'm critical of the Democratic Party, I don't ever see them coming to somebody like me to throw money behind it so that I could spend less time at my day job being a carpenter and more time here at home editing clips and doing whatever, right? So I'm always sort of curious to talk to the people that are spending a lot more time on the ground and working for advocacy organizations like Rights and Democracy. You know, I have had Isaac Grimm on this channel before. So I think it's like, I always want to sort of like tap into that a little bit and be like, hey, from the on the ground perspective, what's the take on this kind of nonsense? You know what I mean?
Yeah. See, I wish maybe you brought on a guy with more concrete opinions here. So I'm kind of weighing two separate things. One is that, like, there is a need for the Democratic Party to do this. It just feels like they did this about 20 years too late. And that, like, they're kind of they're reacting rather than being proactive. Because if you look at the conservative side of things, like, there's just a history of right-wing billionaires propping up AM radio, or like the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro. Like, we don't really know where a lot of like that initial capital came from or anything.
Yeah, I mean, Rush Limbaugh, dude, like, this goes back a long way.
Yeah. If there's one thing you need to know about media, I mean, I'm sure you know this, it's like media is not very profitable. It's a huge sink. So, like, on some level, like, I kind of see the need to do that. And I guess, like, yeah, the dark money aspect of that doesn't really sit right with me either. Because fundamentally, a lot of this dark money, who has the most amount of money to give to causes like this? It's the capitalist class. Now, it might be a capitalist class that is a little bit more open to social issues, like maybe they believe trans people are people, and believe in basic human dignity, but on economic issues, like, they're not supporting, like, a socialist model to addressing the housing crisis.
Right. Well, their philosophy on that could very well be something like, hey, like, if you throw trans people in prison, that's less customers buying my product. Like, there's like a purely capitalist motive behind that, right? Like,
no, 100%. But yeah, also, like, also what I think about, like, I run field programs for candidates that my organization has supported. And I would get in a lot of trouble if I gave out literature to voters that didn't have a disclaimer saying where this money was coming from, who we are, and like how you can find us. Like I would get in a lot of trouble if I made a mistake and forgot to put that on our literature. And it doesn't quite sit right with me that these dark money groups can then just fund a lot of this money into these influencers and we don't know. And another thing too is that, like, there should be more guidelines on, like, when you're receiving paid political content. Like on Instagram, you have to have, actually I'm not on Instagram that much, like I'm on TikTok, if something's an ad, it will say sponsorship right there. So that way I know when the person's talking about a product, I know that, hey, maybe this person's not being 100% genuine, or at least I'm informed that this person is being paid to say nice things about this person. Now, it doesn't mean that, like, that product isn't good and that I wouldn't want to go and buy that product, but I need to be informed as a consumer. And I feel like that we as voters should be as informed as possible. So that doesn't quite sit right with me. But I also think, too, the last part is that, I mean, these groups like the 1630 Project, they weren't going to, like, Hassan Piker. They weren't going to, like, Chapo Trap House. Like, they weren't going to, like, the Sam Cedars. Like, there was a selection bias in who they're choosing to support, where I feel like the conservative movement was just like, all right, you think fluoride turns you gay? Here's money. Like,
Yeah.
Like
Well, the thing that gets me about that is I'm like, dude, Sam, like the Majority Report and Hassan, and like those guys have a much bigger following than a lot of other people, right?
Yeah.
So it's like
100%. Yeah.
those are the ones that you like might want to actually be funding, but the problem is that those particular outlets are the ones that are dragging the Democratic Party in a direction that they don't want to go in. So that's why you see money going to people like Brian Tyler Cohen or David Pakman instead, right? People that are willing to sort of toe that line.
Yeah, and that's the thing too is like, like, and some of these influencers that I saw, I'm forgetting a lot of their names right now, but it's like, it's content made for people who are already Democrats. So like, it's not even a good investment of these resources. Like they could be going like there should just be some sort of like creator fund that's like, hey, if you check off these values here, like we'll send you like, like seed money to go buy cameras and go buy like better microphones and stuff like that.
Yep.
And like I really think that like it should be like targeting like an ecosystem, and the best are just going to rise up from there. So it's like, and I don't know the 1630 project, but like I know how a lot of these nonprofits work. I've worked in the nonprofit sector for a while now. And I think the ultimate problem is, and maybe I'm gonna trash on 1630 a little bit. I'm gonna make a few assumptions. Sorry if anybody from there is listening to this or watching. But like, it is out of touch people. It's usually like college educated people who live in a city that's already heavily Democratic, and they're out of touch with the average person. Like they have usually much more privilege in their lives than like the average voter has. And they don't know what it's like to wake up in a cold house because the oil was too expensive. Like they never really had hardships like that. So
they don't know what it's like to go to work and potentially have to bleed every single week because you're just so like susceptible to injury at your job, right? Yeah. Like they sit behind a desk all day.
They have a laptop job. And by the way, I have a laptop job. Okay. So, a lot of this critique maybe could be put on me here. But I also do like real stuff in the real world too. But,
hey, as long as you're willing to recognize it, you know what I mean? Like that's the most important part. Self-awareness here.
Yeah. Having privilege isn't bad. I think it's like acknowledging it, like I didn't have like a very tough childhood here, because I grew up in a union household here, I was born a straight white male, so if there is a God, they definitely love me. But I think it's important to at least, just acknowledge that and appreciate it. Like I have a paid organizing position with an organization that I align with 100%. There are not a lot of people that can say that. So like, I'm really appreciative of that fact. But kind of going back to like, like 1630 and like these other dark money groups, is that it's people that say the Democrats are great. More people need to know that. And I think you and I, and maybe the type of people willing to listen to this, want a lot more from the Democratic Party and just from the left in general. And there's no like introspection in that. I like to call it kind of like the Democrat Party ecosystem. Was it Brian Tyler Cohen? Like there's just not a lot of introspection. Like they're bought in. They are the partisan. Like they're the party people right there. And it seems like a lot of these funds were just going to talking to that ecosystem. Like we're not going into like these rural areas without a lot of college education. Like they're not watching Cohen at all. Okay.
It's like let's put some lead shielding on this echo chamber we've got over here,
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I'm conflicted because like I like the idea of like putting money and resources into like like a left influence like social like media circle here. But like the root cause is just that the Democratic Party and all of like the apparatus around it is just fundamentally flawed and doesn't stand for anything other than we're not Republicans.
Right. And I mean, and that's basically it. Is like you're never gonna captivate people by saying what you're not gonna do. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't play to anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And here's the thing, like it's really ingrained in me voting is harm reduction, right? And like, I'll be honest with you, I voted for Harris in 2024, even though I had serious reservations about, her administration, being vice president, being supportive of the genocide against the Palestinian people. But I'm a multi-issue voter. I care about climate change. I care about reproductive rights. I care about a lot of things. So I kind of held my nose and voted for her. But like, when I'm like, hey, I have this problem with Harris, a lot of like the Democrat Party, and I'm not calling them Democratic Party. It kind of annoys them if you just call them the Democrat Party. And they're not Democratic at all. But like the thing is like, oh, but you're not gonna vote for Harris. What do you want, Trump? Like, no one ever says like, oh, come on, but like, I know that you don't like Harris, but like her healthcare policy is really good. And like, you really like that, right? It's like, she didn't have a healthcare policy. She didn't have
that's
policy.
Completely absent from the conversation, like completely absent.
Yeah, exactly. Or like, 2016, like, oh, I really don't like Hillary. I was a Bernie supporter. I don't really like the idea of political dynasties, especially from like a husband and wife. And all these things. And the answer was still like, well, it's not Trump. And it's like, that kind of argument might work on me. Like, I am somebody that is relatively privileged. I'm educated. Like I understand, a lot of these things. But to the average voter, like the average voter needs to feel excited about something. Like we as humans are very emotional creatures. And I know I just called myself, well-informed and educated here, but I too am an emotional creature as well. And we need to feel compelled to support, these candidates. And yeah, saying they're not Trump, like that doesn't mean anything. Like, what if the voter says, well, both of them just seem kind of bad? Like, like what kind of argument is vote for Hillary Clinton or Harris because they're not Trump? Like you don't, like people respond well to positive reinforcement. People need a positive reason to do something. Like, it's not very human nature to, do something out of like fear necessarily. Like we can all be motivated by fear, of course, but we're more motivated through positive reinforcement. It's like, if I clean my apartment, I'm going to go play video games here. But if I'm going to say like, don't clean my apartment, I'm going to flagellate myself here. Like the reward of playing video games is a much more powerful motivator for me than, doing that.
Right. Well, and I mean, look, like for my personal take, like I definitely a huge objection that I had to Harris was that I was 100% confident that she was just basically going to completely copy paste Biden's Israel Palestine policy going forward. And I think like, and
no evidence like, to say something different.
Right. Exactly. That's the thing is that like and it's like we, and everybody's like, wants to have this theory about like, well, maybe it would have been, it was like, we don't know because that's a reality we never got to live through. Right. That's a different timeline that we'll never see. And so, but I just, knowing the way things have gone historically, Occam's razor tells me it was probably going to be about the same. And so, but I mean, I think one of the biggest reasons for me personally that I also voted for Harris. This channel will get a lot of flack in comments sometimes that it's like, oh, we're defending Biden. No, man, like I actually kind of hated Biden. Like, like he did, there's stuff that he did that I appreciate. He was the first president to ever join a picket line.
Yeah. Or the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, that was a great thing that not a lot of people knew about, Right. And you can acknowledge that there were good things that happened during the Biden administration, but the way that they played it was absolutely irrelevant to captivating people. And then there was a sort of just the degree to which his senility was on full display all the time really shook the confidence of a lot of folks. And that's like, and now he's a meme for it. Right. But for me, one of the biggest sort of objections that I had to Harris was the fact that she was not democratically chosen to be like it was so like I looked at it and I was like, this is so like, how can you call yourselves the Democrats when you do not allow us to democratically choose our candidate? You literally picked a candidate
for us and then put them up. Like, we had no say in that. And then the follow on to that was like, well, let's pull in Liz Cheney, right? Because Dick Cheney has such a great legacy, you know? It's just like, it was maddening to me. And I was like, and I remember talking to people that summer and I was like, Trump's going to win. Like, this is not a conversation that we can even have right now. Like, I don't care how well she performed in the debate. Trump's going to win because they bungled it on like 5 or 6 different angles. And it was just abundantly clear to me. Yeah, exactly. It was preposterous.
Yeah. And also too, that kind of reminds me as well. Kind of going back to how undemocratic the Democratic Party is. And you mentioned Chairman Ray Buckley here in New Hampshire. So there are people that vote for the next party chair that are appointed by the party chair themselves. And there are certain town Democratic committees that don't get a vote in the party chair, but others do. And it's not tied to how many, registered Democrats you have in that town. It's completely done by fiat. So there's really no room for democracy in the Democratic Party. And again, I want to also really emphasize that democracy is not just one person, one vote. It's a system or a government that really considers the needs of everybody. And, I felt that as a college student trying to get involved with the Democratic Party, that I had no influence over how the course of this party is going to work. I realized pretty quickly that, I am a nobody, even though I was born and raised here, I come from a union household. I have all these values. I'm ready and willing to fight. I'm young. I have all this energy. And the people calling the shots haven't really had a real political, experience since like Jimmy Carter, they're still writing, handwritten postcards to people who are never going to read the fucking postcards. Also, I don't know if I can swear or not. Sorry.
No, you are perfectly welcome to swear. I don't care. Yeah. I do not care. You're good.
But also one thing I do want to say, I want to validate anybody. If you did not vote for Harris because particularly the genocide, I am not a one issue voter. But if you are going to be a one issue voter, genocide is a great issue to be a one issue voter on. So, so I find myself in this weird kind of position right here because I am a leftist. I have no interest in continuing capitalism any longer. I want to build up, a government that actually reflects the will of the people here. But I voted for Harris, but I don't shame people for not doing it because I understand why that wouldn't sit well, why you could not stomach to vote for somebody that was going to perpetuate a genocide. So I just want to say I really respect that. So I don't want to vote shame anybody because also at the end of the day, voting is an individual act. And I'm not really interested in shaming people for an individual act. That is important, but I view it on as it's up to the party and to the candidate to compel that voter to support you. And it kind of feels like the Democratic Party is just running on this momentum of, hey, it'd be a real shame if Republicans got elected. You wouldn't want that now. And it seems like we're not allowed to ask more of the Democratic Party because, Donald Trump and Republicans are fascists. But then the Democrats lose anyway. And what really frustrates me is that I think the party wants to blame the left. They want to blame Bernie supporters. They want to blame socialists. They want to blame, the Palestinian liberation movement. Because if you can just blame somebody else, you don't have to think about what could we be doing better. Instead of saying, hey, our party's stance on Israel-Palestine is overwhelmingly unpopular with our own party. They are still able to use the talking point that Palestinian liberation folks are the reason why that, Donald Trump won. But there's this paradox. It is kind of like this idea that leftists and socialists are powerful enough to cost the Democrats an election, but we're not powerful enough to try to appeal to us and get us excited to vote for you. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And again, I, as an individual voter, I don't have any power. And this is true of anybody, right? We are just voters. We can talk to other people. Now we're getting into organizing, but the vast majority of people in the society are just voters. And it is really important that the party is actually doing enough to compel those people too. We don't have power. We're all just individuals here, trying to make the best choice possible. So who has more power? Some guy with a Palestinian flag on his blue sky, profile here, or the second most powerful party in this country. So like, why is this like, like Twitter person getting like all the blame for Trump winning when the party didn't do anything to try to appeal to really anybody? Actually, no, the only people they really tried to appeal to were the right wing kind of like centrists who just voted for Trump anyway. Because like you see stuff like, like the border wall. Our Senator Maggie Hassan, a Democrat, she did a campaign ad on the Mexican-U.S. border. We're in New Hampshire. We border Canada. So like she's trying to get votes of people that are really passionate about the border. But why would you go and support a Democrat when the Republicans, that's their issue? Like
they literally do it so much better.
If border security was important to me, I'm going to look at a Democrat who's trying to move to the right, or I look at a Republican who's always had this consistent position. Who am I going to trust more on that kind of issue right there? But Democrats are always trying to go after these scraps, like, oh, let's get Liz Cheney. And the data has shown that touring around Liz Cheney did not get them any more Republican votes at all. And
no, it just lost them votes from the left. Like...
Yeah, exactly. It made me less enthusiastic to vote. Like, because like I'm in a coalition with Liz Cheney. Like she is an absolute monster. And maybe the liberals kind of do the opposite of what the leftists do, would overly purity test. But like, somebody will have one good stance and like suburban liberal wine moms will absolutely swoon over them. And I think like Gavin Newsom is an example of this. Like this guy is an absolute monster to trans people and to the homeless. And because he started saying mean things to Trump, like everyone's like, we got to make this guy president. And then when I critique that this guy put on hair and makeup to go personally help clean up the homeless encampment camp, like I'm like purity testing. But why isn't anybody blaming Gavin Newsom for being a monster and doing things that are going to go against my core values? Like, why is that?
No, you're right. But this is something that I think is like, this gets to a point that I always want to try to like put a little pressure on, where I feel like there's this impulse from like the more liberal centrist side of the Democrats to basically paint anybody to their left as being very all or nothing, right? Like, if we say like, oh, we're socialists, we would like to see the end of capitalism, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times what that actually means, like when people really say that, what they're saying is, I want to progressively decommodify things that we are determining to be fundamental needs of people to survive in society today. So that's stuff like healthcare, that's stuff like housing, that's stuff like the internet, like having internet access. That's things like utilities, like having electricity in your house or running water, right? The point is like, why the hell would we commodify these types of things when we are the richest nation in the world and we could just cover it? Right? It's like,
right? Yeah.
Like there's
that's not even socialist. Like Medicare for all, not even socialist. It's just good policy. Like it would help a lot of the people that I talk to at the doors, a lot of people I see in my community. Like, like Medicare for all is the compromise position that I have. Like, and I think kind of, as you said, like, like socialism, it's a transitionatory state. It's saying like, hey, like we're now in a phase, of our society where we're just moving to this way right now. We don't have any and I don't want to be this guy here, but we don't have any actual communist governments right now. Like China right now, their whole intent is like, we're striving for communism right now.
Did we ever was there ever a real communist government? Like, I just like,
no, it's an ideal to strive towards. And that's why I call myself a socialist. I don't mind if I get called a communist. But like, I'm so focused in like the now, what are we doing right now? And it's maybe a distinguishment here that doesn't really matter too much. But yeah, it's like, I'm not trying to nationalize every single hospital and private doctor practice. Like that would be like an actual like socialistic like move right there. I'm just trying to make sure that like you don't go bankrupt when you go to the emergency room, if you hurt your back while on a job or something like that and you didn't have health insurance.
Well, and I think like, there's a few points to sort of address here, but like, even it's like, if you look at like sort of like a more like, just broadly speaking, like Marxist orthodoxy, when you're thinking about it, right? Even Marx is like, look, like he's describing a broader transition that has to occur over time. But even he like acknowledges that he doesn't necessarily have all of the like prescriptions to offer to people, because he's like, look, like, this is the dynamic that's going to occur, but it needs to play out in like a very like momentary basis that stacks and is sort of like cumulative, right? And the different dynamics are going to occur in this process that need to be examined and understood. And I mean, like, I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with somebody like Lenin, where he's just like, yeah, let's just jump from feudalism to fucking full communism. And it's like, well, you can't, like, that's not necessarily going to work, because you didn't go through the transitionary process, right? You didn't go through all the steps necessary. So like, of course you needed authoritarianism to implement what you were trying to do. And that's how you get somebody like Stalin, right? You're leaving the door open for all of these things that then come along and completely undermine the whole fucking argument, right? And then everybody's got ammunition to paint you as like, well, look what the communists did and blah, 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 you know. And it's like, look, like, I'm standing here and I'm like, dude, I don't want state issue video games. And to your point, like, you know, it's like, even among the left, like, right, even among the left, we still, you know, your point earlier about like, oh, you still want to let the influencers that are the most successful communicators rise to the top. And like, if that's not like an innovation and competition forward thought, then I don't know what the fuck is. Like, we still support this notion. So there's this like weird impulse to basically use a way of saying like, oh, well, we just want the state to do literally everything and implement it that way and just like tell everybody what to do. And it's like, no, that's not true at all. What we want is to be able... Right, exactly. What we want to be able to do is identify the things that we're like, oh, okay, this is something that like at this point everybody kind of needs. So we should just pay for it, right? Like, because we have the ability to do so. It's not that difficult. Like, it's very, very simple. And anything that would try to argue the position to be otherwise, I think is like, well, if you're doing that, you're fundamentally showing your cards that you hate the way I think and you want to silence me for having that position.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Well, also too, not, especially even in like the liberal centrist establishment, nobody actually knows what the hell socialism actually is.
Right.
And like you'll see it all the time. Like, you know, like sometimes you'll see someone be like, oh, like, you know, you hate socialism, but you like fire departments. Like, I've seen like elected Democrats say that. And it's like, no, a fire department is not socialist. It's just, again, it's a good thing to do. Now, would a socialist society probably have, you know, fire departments that are financed by like the public? Yeah. But like, you know, it's like Hitler drank water. It doesn't make me a Nazi, you know?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That example, maybe, but you know, but,
no, but points taken. Like,
you know, it's like, but like, we don't even know what socialism is, what Marxism really is as a society, unless, you know, you're one of like, you know, like the small number of people that actually do identify as Marxists. And yeah, I think like the way that I interpret it too is that like, I think what Marx really did, and by the way, I had a very anti-intellectual bent to me for a while. So I've really only started recently reading, particularly Marx and Marxist theory. But kind of like the takeaways that I have from that is that Marxism is kind of like an approach that you have of analyzing the world around you. Like, because that's what Marx did, is that he just looked around the society. He said, what existed before this? What's happening now? And why? And I think really like that kind of way of thinking is the best way of implementing Marxism, is that you're thinking of all these contradictions in our society. Like, I think a really good one is, like the Christian nationalists, they want more white babies, right? Right. Or maybe they might say like, oh, we just want more American babies born here. But then we don't make housing affordable. We don't make healthcare affordable. Like we make it hard to be a parent. You don't get enough sick time at work. Kids get sick a lot. And really, I think like a Marxist would look at this and say, well, I mean, maintaining the population is a good thing. Now you can either do that through births or through immigration. So, my kind of thing is like, all right, well, I think we should probably make it easier to be an immigrant, and we should probably make it easier to be a parent at the same time.
Yeah, why not do both?
It's like, okay, so like, what do we need to do to make it easier for people here to have kids if they want them? And it's like paid sick leave, parental leave and all that stuff. Like, so I really think like the best contribution that Marx gave us was critical theory, right? Like You're just analyzing and you're finding the contradictions in our society, and you're just trying to work through those contradictions. Like no kids, no workers. How do we solve that problem? And I think that's really all that Marxism is.
It's like socioeconomic physics, right? Like
yes,
in a lot of ways, you're really just trying to describe like the nature of systems. And
yeah, exactly.
It's not even necessarily like a full blown philosophy. It's like a roadmap to understand just what the fuck is happening around you.
Yeah, exactly. And like Karl Marx never lived to see a Marxist government. So like, the way that it's interesting, like you mentioned Lenin, the way that Vladimir Lenin approached Marxism is different than the way that Mao Zedong, approached Marxism. Like Mao was about liberating and educating, and even educating still sounds a little paternalistic here, but like giving peasants the tools themselves to come to the same conclusions that Mao came to. Whereas Lenin's style was like, we need to radicalize the factory workers in like the urban centers, and we need to just have people in the right positions to shut the city down, like when we need to. And like, I'm not going to say like one is right, one is wrong. They're different. And so when I think about, like how do we actually get a system like this in America? And I think Marx was also like a huge advocate of this. Is like, your movement has to cater to the material conditions around there. And I think one of those material conditions here in America is like, we do fundamentally believe in elections. We do fundamentally believe in at least this idea of fairness and the ability, for, one person to speak up and to actually implement change. So this is kind of like a vague prescription here, but I think that any sort of like socialist movement in America needs to kind of be aware of that reality. Like if you're advocating for like the abolition of like, elections, you're going to have to contend with this this notion that most people in our society have, that elections are great and that they're fair.
Right. And so I guess like, go ahead.
No, I had another thought, but it left me.
Oh, okay. We are good. Don't worry about it. So I guess like sort of the final question I kind of want to like land on here, because we're sort of getting towards the end of things, is I want to sort of like ask like, in a very subjective manner, right? What do you do? How do you personally approach, say, convincing somebody who's like showing you signs that they might be like they're sort of like agreeing with the notion like, yeah, like property taxes are totally fucked up, man. Like we need to do something different about this, which is like, oh, okay. So you're like literally open to the idea of changing the way we do fundamental tax structures, but they're saying something at the same time like, oh yeah, dude, Chicago's messed up. And, like, do you know how much murder happens there? Right. Like where you've got sort of just like this like cacophony of ideologies. And you're like, okay, like I could literally see this person voting for like either Joyce Craig or Kelly Ayotte, or I could see them voting for like they said they hated Kamala more than they hated Trump, even though they say outwardly that they hate Trump. And you're like in this strange place where you're like, I don't even know what you believe politically. How do you approach convincing them to your like, or just sort of maybe not even convincing? I feel like that might be a little too strong of a term, but like showing in a positive light your view to a point that they might take that home and think about it more and actually adopt it at a later point where they feel like it's their own idea.
I'm actually really glad that you asked that question, because this is a huge focus of my work right now. And so it's the idea that, and I think here you painted a picture of a person with contradictions and cognitive dissonance. And we all have cognitive dissonance. I believe contradicting things, all right, as much as I hate to admit it. I'm not going to tell you any because I don't want to admit how imperfect I am right now. But really, a bad assumption that people make is that human beings are rational people who always make rational decisions, that we are just some high-minded robots that, are always making the most rational choice. human beings are really emotional creatures. And from some of the research that I've done, so we put on a summer training series at Rights and Democracy, where we have put on educational sessions about how, or trainings actually, on how to have these exact kind of conversations right now. And from the research that we found, I really recommend this one book called The Persuaders. I'm forgetting the name of the author right now, but basically he's gone into like a lot of like studies. He's followed around a lot of organizers. Okay, so his name is it's The Persuaders at the Front Lines of the Fight for Hearts and Minds by Anand, and I'm really going to butcher his name here. I think it's Gira Hart. Okay, I'm not going to try to butcher that last name. Sorry. I need to get better. But anyway, so what research has really shown is that when you attack somebody's beliefs, their brain will respond in a similar way as being threatened with physical harm. And when you are in that kind of state, like think about that. If you're really scared or if you are feeling threatened, are you in a very persuasive mindset? Now, like you're thinking, how do I protect myself? How do I protect my body? How do I get myself out of the situation? And when it's something like, in attacking an idea that somebody has, your sense of self is how you have a sense of safety. If you know who you are, like that is a level of emotional safety and security that people are going to want to protect. So one thing I really, really recommend is that if you're talking to somebody who has contradictory beliefs or beliefs that go against your own, your first instinct has got to be, don't be angry, be curious. You want to find out, why does this contradiction exist here? And really asking questions of like for instance, we've done like deep canvassing around like immigration. And we would start out the conversations with like, all right, on a scale 1 to 10, 1 is America's closed, no more immigrants, and 10 means you want open borders. Anybody that wants to come here can. And my colleague was talking to this one guy. He works at McDonald's, and he goes, I am a 2. And we start by asking questions. We don't go like, oh, you're a 2, so blah, 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 blah. We ask, well, how come you're not a 1? How come you're not a 3? Can you tell us about that? And he said, well, I'm not a 1. I do work with an immigrant from Afghanistan. And we're like, oh, well, tell me more about this coworker of yours. And he goes on to describe a great guy. He loves his family. He's working hard. It's like a second job. And he talks about his coworker just wants to provide a good life for his kids. Which is also something that guy is very interested in providing for his kids. We just kind of walk through that like, oh, okay, yeah. So like this person, came here for a better opportunity. And like, so it really sounds like you actually like support people being able to come here, like if they're willing to like work and, better themselves, which is really what most people want to do. And really just kind of getting this guy like thinking really good things about his coworker, like really reminding that like, you have this political belief, but you also have this immigrant coworker. Like that's a contradiction. That is a cognitive dissonance that person is holding in their head. And by getting them talking about how they feel about this person, what this person's actually like, you're able to actually then kind of shift this person's mind a little bit. And so we end with the same question that we start with, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about immigration? And this guy ended as a 5. And really, you can do this with the people in your life. Now, you don't have to, give them like the number system or anything like that. You can be a little bit more informal here. But what's really important is that, like, again, like you aren't lecturing this person. You're not saying, oh, well, immigrants are good people. And statistics actually show that immigrants commit less crime than natural born citizens, which is true. It is true. But that doesn't persuade anybody. Like, the whole right, like Ben Shapiro, like, I'm going to destroy you with facts and logic. It doesn't work at all. Like, you validate the person that you're talking to. Like, you're not calling them a xenophobe. You're not, name calling or anything like that. You are just letting this person talk through their feelings. And it sounds really, silly. It sounded silly to me, I have some toxic male traits in that way. But it really is the best way of being able to connect, because think about having a political conversation. How often, when you're discussing politics, are you actually listened to and validated? It's really rare, because usually most political conversations turn into debates or arguments. But I feel like I've always kind of had this natural tendency in me that I've been able to more intentionally nourish, is that, like, I'm curious. I love consuming conservative media. I love talking to conservatives because I want to know how they tick. I want to know what news that, like, they're consuming. Like, I really want to know about this person. And I think really, in order to be able to persuade anybody, you have to genuinely care about them as a human being. And that's why I think if you are a socialist, you can't just say, oh, people are fucking stupid. These idiots are racist and they're transphobes and, all this stuff. I think in order to be an effective leftist that is willing to build power, you actually have to care about these people. And they might believe stuff that is absolutely revolting to you. But on a human level, you should be a socialist because you want to benefit all of humanity. Even that person that has the worst political take that you hate. I like to say a catchphrase of mine is, fuck you, you're getting healthcare anyway. And
I literally just brought this up, and I've brought this up on this channel before, where it's like, look, dude, like my opposition having universal health care only helps me because the second they have it, they are now more likely to support this particular policy agenda because it benefits them too. Like,
yes,
I'm giving it to them, like, in that sense.
I'm gonna lower your cost of living whether you like it or not, Right, yeah. No, don't be that aggressive to them. But that's like my of course not. But that's my internal monologue here. And by the way, I think if you're a leftist, it's really easy to be cynical. I started off this conversation talking about revolutionary optimism. I am a naturally pessimistic person. Like, yeah. I really, my experience in politics have got me to be cynical and say that, politicians are all selfish and, like, there's really no point. And I'm just going to completely give up and, start like my own like anarchist book club or something like that. Which, by the way, like, building community is great. And you should probably do book clubs and do like community events and stuff like that. But you really do have to believe, even if this person in front of you is revolting, you still have to think, if this person grew up with different conditions and they had the same, information that I did and the same security that I did growing up and safety that I had, that, like, they would believe what I believe. They had the same experiences as me. So, like, it's almost kind of like we talked a little bit about Christianity here. I was born and raised Catholic. I don't have the faith anymore, but I like to say that I kept the values to that. And I do like to say, I maintain the love for my fellow man. Even those that I might, find absolutely revolting. Like, I have to love that person even if I don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I thank you for your answer, because I think it is sort of a lot of the way that I look at it too. And I mean, like, I always try to come at it more from like I've said this a couple times on the channel that, like, I'm fascinated by sociology, and I think, like, the C. Wright Mills sociological imagination is a really great way to yes. look at the broader problem. And, like, I think there's a lot to be said for the absence of acknowledgement for sort of people's emotional and spiritual commitments when it comes to making political decisions, right?
Yeah.
And that if you're trying to just sort of like ignore all of those dynamics, that you are setting yourself up to fail, because realistically, like, it's those emotions, those sort of like primal feelings that are informed by life experience. It's that subjectivity that really creates the worldview. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times, like in your example, you know what I mean? It's like, you have to like take the time to walk somebody through their own experiences again and have them like with you. You're doing it together, right? It's a sort of cooperative effort where you're like, well, like, let's talk about this again and see, like, do we really feel this way? Like, did we pull the right takeaways from this? Like,
yeah.
was that actually what happened? Or like, is there maybe more to it that gets sort of truncated because your feelings are too hot? And when you actually take a step back and try to interrogate your feelings, in a sense, like you're being more like academically critical of a feeling, which seems so like counterintuitive to do, but it's like these things act in synergy, and they're not these mutually exclusive objects that like, well, one does it and then the other doesn't, and we aren't in this weird sort of separate black and white thing. It's really more dialectical.
Yeah. People are much more gray. I think than they believe. And by the way, contradictions I think are wonderful, and they're kind of like some of the most interesting things to me. Like, we're analyzing an emotion. Like, that is kind of a contradiction, right? Like, you're trying to use logic on to analyze something that is not logical at all. And I think like that synthesis is really, really important. And I think that's kind of what separates us. Like, because think about this, like, if we're too cold and logical, like, we could probably make a justification for being able to sell babies for organs, right? Now, if we're too emotional, we can also think of the negative consequences of that as well, right? Like, oh my God, I am afraid of everyone that doesn't look like me, so therefore I need to build a society where everybody looks like me. Like, that's too far extreme right there.
Yeah.
I think what really makes us humans is that, we have that emotional side and that logical side, and that we just need to be able to, use them together, because they both have benefit. Awesome. I have an emotional desire to want everyone in my community to be, safe and secure. I also have a logical desire because then there'll be less poverty and crime. Right.
It's the two really go hand in hand. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for talking with me today. This has been like super delightful, and I'm really glad that we were able to, I feel like we covered like a whole bunch of different stuff, and touched on some of like the smaller things and the bigger things, and mainly connected point A to point B, which was that was the real goal. So thank you so much for your time, man.
Yeah. Could I just give one piece of advice to anybody here listening about like what they could do?
Absolutely. All
right. So if you are a cynical online leftist and you're not doing anything in the real world, there are many, many things you can do. And I think these are really, really easy. There are things like you could be just watching your local government and talking about it somewhere. And I'm talking about, it could be like you're live tweeting, a meeting, you are, hosting like a YouTube channel or TikTok account where you're talking about it, or you're getting Sunday coffee with people, and that people are more than welcome to join you with and discuss that kind of thing. You could be going out and joining like a mutual aid group, and you could be giving out supplies to people in need. And while that's not going to solve all of our problems immediately, it's still a great way of building community. You need to be talking to human beings. We evolved to be able to interact with each other face to face, and you just need to be doing something that is face to face in the real world. And if you can't do stuff in the real world, then doing stuff digitally is also valid as well, because everyone's online these days. Try things. Don't be afraid to fail. When things fail, analyze why they fail. I tried organizing tenant unions, and those things have failed. But I've been able to communicate my failures with other people, and now we're going to keep trying to do it with different methods. So just keep trying to do something. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to look foolish. Really, doing something is better than doing nothing.
Salient. Thank you so much, man. That was a great note to end on. I just truly appreciate it. That was a very, very good way to close things out. So thank you so much for stopping by today.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right,
and cool. So that does it for today's episode of Locally Sourced. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you want to support, you can go to patreon.com/locally sourced. And that's all for today. We will catch you guys on the next one.